Hey guys, Ben here. So I've been sitting on this footage for a while, and this is of me creating a myth among us, which is a Centurion magazine well integrated into a Magnus. But now that I've put all the footage together, it's in a somewhat watchable position, so that anyone who wants to try to attempt this mod themselves can do so. Hopefully someone somewhere out there can understand what I'm saying. Basically, I cut it to size first, and then I slid the slide down through the magazine through this. So basically the magazine is pinning this half of the shell, the Centurion shell, to the Magnus shell. I got all the hot glue on the border. It's not attached to the slide. I made sure it was not connected to the slide. There is a little bit of plastic from the lower Magnus shell in between there holding it on. I'll take this apart just like any other normal integration and fuse it together with the polyurethane. And then once I have everything secure together and I know everything works, everything still is good, that's when I'm going to do the externals and sand everything down and make sure I clean up all the lines and fill that and stuff. So also cut this off. I just wanted to, there's a little piece in there, that piece that extends out to probably about like right there, and I wanted to make sure that that had enough clearance, but I'm probably going to trim that down as much as I can. So it's important to note that this line is straight across. I had to go down right to, there's a little groove right here on the Magnus that holds the slide in. I had to go right down to the thin plastic that's on that slide in order to fit this. And then this side is not straight across. It kind of goes like that, and then back up. And the reason for this is because there is a anchor point right here. It's right up against here. I'm telling you, just everything just barely fits on this. There's an anchor point right here that I'm going to use to hold the trigger assembly in place. Obviously I'm going to solvent weld one side to here, but I wanted another anchor point right there. And then there's another screw point right here on the Centurion shell that goes in right there. You can see the hole. So everything looks like it's everything looks like it's going in there well. So just taking a look at the internals, you can see that peg right there that I was talking about, and the peg right there that I was talking about, and how everything just kind of meshes together very, very snugly. That thin line right there is the seam, believe it or not. Same thing right there. You can see where I had to cut. I had to, there's actually a plate right here. I had to grind that off and just cut it down a little bit. Had to grind down all of the pegs on the Magnus right there. Basically make a stop right here, and then on this slide make it so that it runs into the part right here, so when I slam it forward it'll drop that anchor, or that dart tooth. So basically all I have to do, this is from the Centurion, basically all I have to do is when I rack the slide forward, make it hit this forward, and it will lower the dart tooth, and that'll be that. So luckily it's very simple. Basically what I've done is kind of first aimed for the outer perimeter of this oval, and then once I got it in there, I then came back with an X-Acto knife and traced around the edge of this, and then with the Dremel, the flywheel, or excuse me, the cutting wheel, I've come and I've created a groove here, and I didn't quite cut all the way through, so that way it rests in that channel that I've cut out. You can kind of see where I flattened it right there at the tip. So now, just kind of fits in there perfectly. And so I'm just going for as much surface area as I can, because I'm going to epoxy that together. In hindsight, when I was cutting out the bit for the oval there, I used the Dremel, and after I did it, I realized I have a scroll saw. I could have used that, but that's okay, because I needed to do the rest of it with the Dremel, so I've realized that I've made an error. There is a hook right about here to hold the spring tension on the magazine well. So I can't really use this bottom piece. That's okay, because it's clamping this piece on well enough where it's holding on its own. So I'm going to use that as clamping pressure for the epoxy. And then I'm just going to, not even epoxy this side, I'm just going to cut it off right there. But this way at least it's clamped. So basically what I've done is I've come down and went this down even further. I didn't touch this on this piece. I also flattened this out completely, because that is what's going to be, that is what's going to be pushing the dart tooth down. So when some net goes in there like that, it pushes right up against there. And that's almost flush with the magazine well. I think there's going to be just enough room. I think I can take that down a little bit more, actually. So I'm fine-tuning these gears to fit inside of the shell, and it's coming so close that I've actually had to score away some of this, because that peg that's barely sticking out is actually just enough to rub against it. But see it easier from this side, I think. See how that just sits in that groove? I do believe I need a little bit more, widen it out a little bit, but it's an improvement, and the shell's fitting together much better. Luckily, there's this guard right here, and it's pushing up against that little red piece right there. And so no matter how hard I push on this, I can tell how these gears are going to fit, and they're flowing absolutely freely, even though I'm pushing down really hard on this. So I don't need to trim anymore. That should be a good fit. If I run into any troubles, then I can just fine-tune it. But this just kind of shows how close everything is actually coming. I mean, it's right up against the plastic. This, I have no idea how this is fitting. Also, luckily, the only thing in the trigger that you need from the Magnus is literally this piece and this piece. All of this junk that was here is just locks, and this fits in there good. And then this piece functions like that, and that's as far as that can go. Obviously, there's no reason why that should be that far out. As far as I can tell, it doesn't look like it's stabilizing it much, because this back part is actually the thing that's stabilizing it. See that little flap right there? I also need to still sand these down, or grind these down, excuse me. Get rid of all of that, because that's sticking out way too far. So I've come in here, and basically what I've done is, wow, that's bright. Basically what I've come and done is, I don't know if you can see that, but I have scored all along here with the X-Acto knife, and all along here, because it started to separate in between right here on this one. This one hasn't separated, but I'm just going, obviously this is a weak point because your handle's right here. These two bits right here are the only thing connecting the rest of this Magnus shell up until here. And so this is a really, really weak point right here. So I'm coming back in with epoxy putty, epoxy, and just filling that in, just so I can get a little bit more tensile strength. Basically, this is the carriage. This is the part that I cut off. You can see the marks there. And I have drilled a small hole. It's actually 5:30 and I haven't eaten all day, so I'm shaking a little bit. Drilled a small hole there, and then used a screwdriver to gently pry the ends open and thread it in there. And so now, when I put this in here like this, that little hole right there, it's going to catch that, so it's always going to stay forward, just like in the normal Magnus, because normally the spring is way out here, hooked directly to the shell, but obviously it's being covered right now by the magazine well, so like I said, everything's just barely fitting. Okay, so it's important to note how I flipped this spring, because I'm pretty sure the magazine is going to be right here anyway. I basically twisted it. If you're looking from this angle, I twisted it counterclockwise, and that's to keep the tension on here from basically flipping over to this side, and so it doesn't run into any trouble. So it's not exactly winning any gold medals. There is a little bit of play right there. As you can see, that's rusting, and I can push up just a hair. But I actually think that's okay. I don't think it's that big of a deal, especially for how much crap I'm fitting into this gun. I don't think that's bad at all. And there's barely... I mean, this spring is pretty weak, so I'm not concerned about this plastic breaking at all. Plenty of room on either side of that hole. I don't think it's going to break, so... I think I'm happy with that. I have no idea what this does. It kind of seems pointless to me, but whatever. That might just be so it can engage it from that distance, but I honestly don't know. Okay, so basically what I've done is I've trimmed this down because that's not necessary, but then I realized it was necessary because it's not only holding the spring in place, but it's keeping it aligned. Now, I had a feeling that this was going to happen, so I had a contingency plan. I drilled a tiny hole and screwed a micro screw. This is not a normal screw. This is one of the smallest Nerf screws that you can get. And I screwed it in there. I might replace that with one of those silver retainers that has almost like the washer built in, and then maybe super glue that into place, because I don't know if you can see that, but to the left, and actually maybe a little bit to the right, there's a little bit of white marks to the left and right of the screw. That I believe is stress marks, and I don't want that to snap. I don't think it's going to, because it's not under... It's almost under no pressure because that spring is really weak, but just in case. I'd feel better with that screw there. And then this piece I've super glued onto this, and that just keeps it aligned so that this isn't getting caught on the retention plate. So when it goes back, and then comes back up. I also sanded down that bit right there. I'll circle it. That just kind of gives it a little more clearance. Okay, so I thought I made a outro for this, or at least more. I thought I filmed more, but I don't. So I'm just going to do a voiceover really quick. Just show you some other detailed pictures. The one thing that's important that I left out is I was having trouble with the dart tooth actually fully going up, and that's because when it was going up, it relied solely on the spring tension. And that isn't a very powerful spring, so if there's anything blocking it, it won't go. And the lever was getting caught. So whenever I'd prime it back, it wasn't going all the way back because the outer shell was pushing on it just a little, and no matter how much I shaved off of it, if there was any pressure on the outside of the shell, it was just stopping that entire arm. So what I did was, right there, I put a small piece of polycarbonate. I just super glued it on there, and that was enough of a spacer to keep the shell from collapsing in enough to put pressure on the arm piece there. So that's pretty much the only thing I left out, other than the fact that I closed off the entire front with polycarbonate pieces, and then I puttied everything. But you can pretty much see that in the rest of the blaster, and you can imagine what that's like to do. It's just normal integration. I just went over the hard stuff, or at least what I thought was the hard stuff in this. So if you have any questions, go ahead and leave them in the comments below. I will do my best to try to answer them. But other than that, thanks for watching.